The next section we want to focus on is how we can go in and really dial in some shadow and some highlight detail. Now the way that I like to do this, and there are a lot of ways that you can do this, is I'm going to create a new group for dodge and burn, except I'm not going to really dodge and burn. I could create a neutral gray layer and do this on that. The way that you would do that, we'll talk about that in class. The way that I do it usually is I will create 2 levels adjustment layers, and the one that I'm going to use for the shadows, I will change the blending mode to multiply. The one that I'm going to use for the highlights, I'll change the blending mode to screen. And what this will do is this is just darken and brighten the image overall. Command I on each of the masks. Using my brush tool, I can go in and painting with white on this mask, I can go in and I can darken areas up. So any area that I'm wanting to darken or just add more depth to my shadows, I can really go in and paint that area. If I don't like what I have, I can just flip my color, paint black on that mask, and hide that area again. And you can really dial in a lot of detail. You got a lot of control when you do your shadows and your highlights like this. I do the highlights the same way. So if I wanted to brighten this area or whatever it is that I want to do, I can really go in and dial that in Photoshop. Next thing we want to look at is how we can go in and add some detail, maybe like change the lip color, change the eye color. You can make adjustments to the lip color by doing something like maybe a hue saturation, changing it to whatever color you want it to be. Invert your mask and then use your brush tool, and you can go in and with white you can kind of reveal that where you want that color change to happen. One thing that I will do sometimes is just create a new layer, new blank layer. Grab white, change the blending mode to screen, and just drop its opacity a little bit. Just adds a little bit of depth. And you can control that. There's a lot of ways that you can do the same stuff. The next thing that we'll look at is how we can go in and do some spot sharpen and some spot soften. The way that I do it is by making a merged visible copy. You can do this by holding down Shift, Option, Command, E with your topmost layer selected, and you'll create a merged duplicate copy of it. We're going to go up to Filter, Other, High Pass, and this will be kind of based on the resolution of your image, but I usually work between like 1 to 4 pixel radius. You want to see a little bit of your image start to pop through. This is going to be the detail. I'm going to change the blending mode of this to either overlay or soft light. Overlay is usually a little more intense, and you'll see the image as a whole is sharp. If I want it to just be specific areas, what I do is I apply a layer mask to this. I invert that mask, and then using my brush tool and painting with white, I can paint in where I want that sharpness to appear. I'm just going to turn my flow up. I'm going to turn that one off, and I'm going to do another merge visible, Shift, Option, Command, E, and I'm going to do the same thing here, except I'm going to soften it. So I'm just going to go back to Filter, Other, High Pass, I'm going to bump this one up a little bit, somewhere around maybe 5 or so. Click OK. And before I apply my blending mode or the mask or whatnot, I'm going to invert this high pass adjustment. That's going to actually do the opposite. Instead of sharpening it, it's going to soften it. Change it to overlay. See that everything's pretty much soft. Again, I'm going to apply a mask, invert the mask. Using my brush tool, I'm going to reveal where I want to soften that image. I'm going to turn my flow down a little bit. And you can go in and you can soften your image, you know, wherever it is that you want to soften it, and you can always control your opacity. That's usually what I'll do with this one, is I'll turn that opacity down. You still want to see some of that texture, but this is just one way that you can go in and do that. That's just kind of a basic way. You could also create a frequency separation, which is what we'll get into next semester, and you can be a little more precise with this. Alright, the last thing that we want to look at is how we can go in and reshape. We can push and pull pixels, and there are a lot of things that you may want to do. Certain images may require you to move pixels around or whatnot. Excuse me. It's kind of a gray area for some people, but I will show you how to do it. Shift Option Command E is going to create another merge duplicate copy of this, and what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Filter, Liquify, and we can use this menu to do a lot of cool stuff. Now, newer versions of Photoshop give you the ability to do a face aware liquify, which will identify specific areas and allow you to do different things to those particular pixels. So left eye, right eye, eye height, width, and whatnot. You can go in and you can dial in on that. But for any version of Photoshop, you should be able to go in and really push and pull pixels. You can pucker pixels, which is basically that same thing. You can bloat pixels, so this is just kind of the manual way. I'm using my bracket keys to turn my brush tool size up and down. Make that larger, make that smaller, or whatnot. It pulls from the center of this brush. I'm going to use this tool up here at the top, which is called Forward Warp Tool, and that's going to allow me to do a couple of different things. I'm going to zoom out. If I wanted to push some of these pixels around, I just click and I just drag in, and be careful because it pulls all the pixels. So let's say I want to drop that shoulder a little bit, pull this down a little bit, maybe this area I'm going to pull in just a hair, pull this out and whatnot, and you can really just kind of go in and just reshape specific areas of this image. Be careful because you can go a little crazy with it, and then once you're happy, just click. I usually like to turn my preview on and off to kind of see what I've done. I want to change the way somebody looks, unless that's what you're wanting. But moving hair and different stuff like that, click OK, and that's basically your image. You can spend a lot of time, and this is really a rough edit, but you can spend a lot of time going in and dialing in on each of these sections, and spending some time removing blemishes, changing skin tones and different stuff like that. Make sure that before you sharpen and soften and liquify, make sure you're happy with your edits, because especially once you liquify, if your client doesn't like the way that you've moved pixels around, if you did this first, you'd have to redo everything. So make sure that you do the liquify option. If you do it at all, make sure you do it at the end, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in class this week.